Good evening to all. I am Dr. Kumaraguru, working as a conservation scientist on behalf of BCF, NGO based at Tamil Nadu in India, with the vision is visualizing society for promoting and assisting healthy coexistence of human and wildlife and ultimately ensuring conservation of biodiversity. So, strategic implementation of this session draws us to handle research and reaching stakeholders in synchronized manner. Our research includes from ants to elephants, and exploring effective management practices in the perspective of biodiversity conservation. With our wide research expertise team, we are able to work from Nagapattinam to Valley of Flower Himalayas, stretching across different landscapes and different people and very dependency on the ecosystem. In nutshell, we connect nature with people, people with nature. So let's get connected today also in the virtual platform to existence and experience nature in enhanced dimension. Thank you all. Thank you for joining today BCF International webinar.
Good evening to all. On behalf of BCF India, I am privileged in introducing our today's speaker, Dr. Ravi Chellam, Lineman of India, Carnivore Biologist, CEO Metastring Foundation India. He was passionate in the conservation of large carnivores, exclusively Asiatic lions, and completed his doctorate in the same. His experience extended towards the conservation and management of wildlife inside and outside the protected areas, human-wildlife conflicts, and restoration of wildlife habitat. He educates the young minds of India through participating as a keynote speaker in several workshops, seminars, conferences, and also creates an awareness on wildlife conservation to the public through several newsprints and magazines. Dr. Ravi Chellam served several positions in the various government and non-governmental organizations. To highlight few of them, he served as a director at WCS India. He was a senior fellow and director at Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment (ATRE), program director, Foundation for Ecological Society since 2014. Also worked for Madras Crocodile Bank Trust and Gharial Conservation Alliance. He is serving as a Vice President and Governing Council position of BNHS, Board of Trustees of Samrakshan, Board of Advisor of Nature Conservation Foundation, etc. He also has served as an expert advisor to amicus curiae, who is a person who will assist the court by offering the information expertise to the bench, Forest Bench of Supreme Court of India. He worked at WIA, Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun, for more than 17 years and served as a project officer at United Nations Development Programme. He also closely worked towards the central government and state government for several conservation projects and also for the policy issues. His expertise is helping the central government to the translocation of Asiatic lions and its conservation. Currently, Sir is a member for the conservation project for Gharials, State Government of Madhya Pradesh. Adding towards his crown, he is serving as a board member for Greenpeace India, and Dr. Ravi Chellam is a member for International Union of Conservation Nature SSC Cat Specialist Group. Sir has published more than 30 research papers in peer-reviewed national and international journals. We are happy to stay connected in this fine evening with you, Dr. Ravi Chellam, sir, Carnivore Biologist, on this virtual platform during this COVID-19, and to listen more on roar of lion and its conservation. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm very glad to have this opportunity, especially to see two of my former teachers in the audience and some friends going back 35 years who I've not seen in a long time. It's amazing how COVID also has these positive elements of reconnecting us with people from our past. I'm going to spend the next hour or so trying to, in some sense, share my experience going back to 1985, working with the lions in Gir. So this is the title that BCF gave me. First time I'm actually giving a talk which has roar in the title. It's normally ecology and conservation and so on and so forth. So I was quite kicked to see the term roar in the title. I currently serve as the head of Metastring Foundation, which is part of a new initiative called the Biodiversity Collaborative based out of Bangalore, which has about 10 or 12 other institutions. I'm also involved with the National Mission on Biodiversity and Human Wellbeing. But to get back to the topic of today, till a few years ago, we all recognized the Asiatic lion as a separate subspecies, and it was called as Panthera leopersica. More recently, from genetic studies, it has become very clear that there are only two existing subspecies of lions. You see a map of Africa here, and if you look closely, there's that little patch of forest in Saurashtra Peninsula of Gir, which is the only population of lions outside of Africa. The West African, Central African, and the Gir lions all belong to the same subspecies called Panthera leo, and the East and South African lions belong to the second subspecies, Panthera leo melanochaeta. This is not commonly known, this is not commonly recognized, but this is current state of knowledge and science. And I just wanted to make sure that all of us are at least introduced to this. When I started showing interest in wildlife in the early 80s, just the African lion used to have between 12 and 15 or maybe up to 20 subspecies. But as genetic tools, as science advanced, it has become very, very clear that we don't have that kind of diversity that you see and observe and think those are different animals, but the genetics prove it otherwise. This is the animal I'm going to be talking about. And lions, as you know, are very special amongst large cats. One, they're sexually dimorphic, which means the male and the female are very distinct. In size compared to the male. The other distinct feature of lions is that they're the only truly social cat. Obviously, all cats will occasionally be in groups, a mother with her young, a male and a female mating. But lions are the only truly social cat. And this picture should not give you the impression that lion society is also organized somewhat like the human society, in that there is a mother, there's a father, and there are children. This is a very unique and unusual picture from Gir, where a male and a female and their young are in the same frame. As you will see through bulk of my rest of the presentation, this kind of an image is very, very rare in Gir, and I'll explain why it is so rare. Some pictures to introduce, because most people who go to Gir often see lions only by the road. I've been fortunate to have had full access, spent a lot of time walking around. Plus, more recently, friends of expert wildlife photographers who went on photography assignments have also contributed some of their pictures, and I'm happy to share some really lovely images from Gir. A couple of young cubs, a adult male crossing a river, and there are about 7 perennial rivers, Gir occurring in a semi-arid kind of zone. Water is a very important resource. Rainfall and the perennial sources of water really drive various ecosystem processes. These streams, for bulk of the year, are dry. It's only the perennial rivers that carry water. And these become very important habitats in many ways for lions, including for resting. Here you see a pair of adult males resting in the soft sand of a dry river, stream bed under the shade of a jamun or syzygium. As I said, moisture and rainfall drive the ecology of Gir. And look at how green it is. This is a week or 10 days after the first rains during the monsoon in about late June or July. And because the rainfall is so short, so limited, and the rainy season is so short, plants take abundant advantage as soon as moisture becomes available. And there's a magical transformation of the landscape. From dry yellows and grays and browns, you see this completely green carpet. Literally, I would say, if you stand there for half an hour, you can see the grass grow underneath your feet. As in the initial slide, where I showed the African continent, the lions evolved in Africa and through a process of natural dispersal, moved through what is today Syria, Iraq, Iran, present-day Pakistan, through much of North and Central India. There are no records south of the Narmada River, but there are plenty of records north of the Narmada River. So Western India, Northern India, Central India, as far east, there's records even from the state of Bihar. So how come today there's only lions in and around Gir? Primarily because of people. Till about 1850s, lions were widespread through this area in India. After which, guns came into India. They were fairly commonly used. People started using guns for hunting. The decline of the lion population was so dramatic from a widespread species in the 1840s and 1850s. By 1888, the last lion outside of Gir had been shot. So in about 3 to 4 decades, there was a precipitous fall, a dramatic reduction, not only in the population of lions, but also in their distribution in Asia, so that it all got restricted to what is today known as Girforest. The last lions in Asia outside of Gir were shot in a place called Distemper in Iran around the mid-late 1940s. So for about 80 years now, the lions in Asia have all been restricted to Gir and its surrounding habitats. How do we know this? Primarily looking through shikar literature, hunting records, natural history notes, and reconstructing the distribution based on the places mentioned as to where they sighted lions or where they had hunted lions. A nice picture of an adult male lion. Very often I am asked, what is the difference between Asiatic and African lion? And now, as I began by showing, actually, the so-called Asiatic lion is really quite closely related and is the same subspecies as the lions found in Central and West Africa. It is only a subspecies away from the lions in East and South Africa. But there are morphological characteristics, but it is not often easy to recognize them. The only real way to know a lion is Asiatic is when you see it in and around Gir. That is the only way. In zoos, now increasingly India is managing their populations better. About 30 years ago, there were African-Asian hybrids in our captive collection. What are the morphological characteristics? One is this fold of skin called the belly fold, very prominent in males and found also in females. This is universal in all lions found in and around Gir. The other thing is the top of the head. The mane is sparse. The ears are always very prominent and clearly seen in all the male lions in Gir. In Africa, more than 50% of the lions have a very luxuriant mane. You can't see the ears. So it's like a haystack. It covers their ears. Strangely, also in Africa, you have 1 or 2 populations of lions where the males don't have manes. So you have the 2 extremes in Africa, and you also have male lions in Africa which resemble the males of Gir. A few more pictures to introduce both the animal and the habitat in which it lives. Now, we often don't recognize and celebrate the fact that the lions in Gir, the Asiatic lions, are actually a wonderful conservation success. If you look at these numbers, around 1880, early 1900s, they very nearly went extinct. And you can see there has been more or less a steady increase in numbers. I request you to don't pay too much attention to the accuracy of these numbers, but only look at these trends, because our wildlife counting techniques and the periodicity with which it is done leaves a lot to be desired. But it is a definite fact that from a close brush with extinction, today we have a resurgent population of lions as far as Gir and its surrounding habitats are concerned. Barely 2 months ago, the most recent count was done, and I left the last slide at 284, and you can see a steady increase, 304, and so on and so forth. And the 2020 count tells us that the current population of lions is about 670. The other interesting number statistic to track is that you see these numbers in pink, 6,600 and so on, and it goes to 30,000 square kilometers. We'll get to it in a minute. So this is roughly the protected area called Gir. The light green has the status of a wildlife sanctuary. The dark green has the status of a national park. For those who are not aware, in national park, no human activities are allowed, including tourism, and you don't even have resident human populations. But in wildlife sanctuary, there are resident human population and tourism. Two other human activities are allowed. You can see the major reservoirs. I told you it's a very important watershed for that region. And there are also many roads and a couple of train tracks that cut through. The ecology of this forest varies quite dramatically from the west to the east, and the management also lends some difference to how the habitat is managed and how the habitat today presents itself for wildlife. There is a decrease in rainfall as we move from the west to east, and that's reflected in the kind of vegetation and prey species assemblage that we find. So this is a bird's eye view of the Gir forest. For those who haven't visited and their knowledge of lions comes from largely African footage that we see on our television, Gir is not a typical savanna grassland habitat. It's not flat. It's a series of low undulating hills, and it's actually a forest. And this is a picture taken in summer, but even in summer you can see dots of several species of trees which are having foliage. Largely these are ficus, but there are a few other species, especially along the rivers, which are evergreen throughout the year. When you go into the forest, this is what it looks like. A lot of ziziphus, bohemia, and so on and so forth. A lot of thorn species of vegetation, fairly open, but at one level also dense, simply because there is bushes, shrubs, quite a bit of grass. I told you, as you move towards the east, the rainfall decreases and the vegetation reflects that. And this is a picture from Eastern Gir. This kind of resembles more closely they have a lot more grassland. A group of lions, which technically are called pride, resting under a large ficus tree, and this is not an uncommon sight. And this is a bufea tree, and there's a male emerging from its shade. And there is a large population of leopard. In case you haven't noticed, there is a leopard here on the Sterculia urens tree. And what enables these two large cats to coexist is simply the difference in their size and the great ability of the leopard arboreal, which is to be able to climb and spend quite a bit of its time and life on trees. The leopard hardly stands a chance with lions on the ground, simply because it's about 50% of its size. If a lion gets hold of a leopard, it will be happy to kill it and even eat it. So its agility and speed and ability to climb trees is what enables the leopard to get out of trouble. And very often the leopard will also take its kill, prey, be it cheetal, sambar, or whatever it's killed, up a tree so that it can feed on it. Otherwise, if lions notice leopard kills on the ground, they will also be happy to steal it from the leopard. We often talk of large cats. Do we really know what large cats are? What are the qualities that determine a large cat? There are simple 3 or 4 things we need to keep in mind. By large cats, we typically mean animals which are 18 kilos or heavier. Lions are much heavier. A big male lion can weigh up to 220 kilograms. A big female would be about 140, 150 kilograms. So you see a significant difference in size between males and females. All large cats are truly carnivores. They cannot be surviving on anything other than meat. You would see them occasionally feeding on bits of vegetation, but that is not what will enable them to survive. Typically, a large cat like a lion and a tiger needs something in the region of 5 to 6 kilograms of meat every day. Obviously, it's only in a zoo that they will get meat regularly every day. In the wild, it's a different manner, schedule. I'll get to it. But the main thing to keep in mind is they are obligate carnivores, meaning purely carnivores. They are wide-ranging. It is not unusual for a territorial male to walk 20 or 30 kilometers overnight, starting around sunset and walking a little past sunrise. And this is not walk where the animal is running or anything like that. This is just part of their way of patrolling and defending their territory, which is what the next point means. They're territorial. They'll fight to defend their territory. And all large cats can roar, and lions probably have the most impressive of roars amongst large cats. Territorial male lions will roar somewhat consistently and regularly from about an hour before sunset till about 2 hours after sunrise. And they can be roaring 3-4 times every hour. And if you have the experience like I've had, and I think Meena is in the audience, she's had, when you're walking on foot and you hear these animals roar, literally, I mean, you can feel the roar in your body if you're close enough, and the earth seems to shake with these animals roaring. India is remarkable for the coexistence of people and large and dangerous animals. Elephants, be it rhinos, be it tigers, leopards, and lions. This is a picture taken within the Gir Wildlife Sanctuary, and here you see a couple of Maldaris, the local residents, on top of their camel. What do the Maldaris do? They graze their livestock. Typical herds consist of about 50 animals, the majority of which are buffaloes. They can have a few cows and bulls, 1 or 2 camels. Some of the richer ones even may have a horse. So they graze their livestock in the forest, and then they live in thorn-enclosed settlements like this called nesses. So here is the opening, and at night these thorn bushes would be used to close it. The cattle lives in the foreground, and in the background the people live. These nesses are located close to water sources, so that both for livestock and people they have access to water. And in those days, when I did my field work between 1985 and 1990, the product of commerce for the Maldaris was ghee. They would milk the cows, the milk would get converted into yogurt, and then the yogurt would be churned to produce the butter, which would then be heated to make ghee. And once a week or once in 10 days, they will load the ghee into tins on a camel and take it to the nearby marketplace and either exchange it for things they need or sell it and get some money. So you see multiple herds here crowding around a water hole. As I said, it's a very dry place. So there is some competition for resources, especially like water. The other downside of this is that the Maldari livestock seldom get the required veterinary attention. So there's always the risk of diseases being passed from livestock on. But in general, the Valdaris have found a way to peacefully coexist with lions and other wildlife. They do lose some of their livestock to the large carnivores, but this is not seen as a problem. They view it as that's just part of nature. I mean, we get so much from nature. To lose one or two buffaloes or cows to lion predation is part of the game. Very, very hardworking people. At least in those days, everything was manual. I'm told now less and less people are riding camels. They've got motorcycles. I also hear that refrigerated vans are coming in to collect the milk. So there is some changes in their lifestyle as general progress has taken place. Extremely hospitable people. They were lifesavers. I had some excellent friends in their community the 5 years I was. These are the major prey. I mean, being a carnivore, obviously, lions and leopards need prey species to survive on. The bottom picture is of cheetal, the top right is of nilgai, and the amber. There are, of course, several other prey species, wild pigs, four-horned antelope, chinkara, common langur, peafowl, porcupines, all of which are killed by lions and leopards. But these three on the picture, and pigs and domestic livestock, are the major prey species for lions within the protected area. There are lots of lions living outside the protected area, and their story is somewhat different. Gir is a wonderful place, extremely high density of wild prey. There is, depending on the terrain, vegetation, and water availability, a change in distribution and density of prey species across the protected area. By far, the most abundant prey species, cheetal. Sambar is the next abundant prey species, and then nilgai and wild. More pictures of prey to give you a sense of the habitat. Here, a Samba male is exhibiting mild alarm. Notice the raised tail. And here is a well-fed lion. This is a big male. Lions are capable of eating enormous quantities of meat. Their predation ecology is what is called as a feast and famine routine. When they get food, they can gorge themselves. They can go sometimes even up to 10 or 12 days without any other substantial meal. Because in the wild, no prey animal is sitting and waiting to be killed, and it's not always that a lion succeeds in its hunt. From African studies, we know that roughly 20% of a lion hunting attempts succeed, which is about 1 in 5 attempts. Now you notice the extended belly here. That indicates a fully fed lion. And the tools of the trade, you see the canine teeth. There are 2 canine teeth in its lower jaw, 2 in its upper jaw. These are the killing tools. Without the canines, the lions can't really kill its prey. And this picture doesn't do justice to the paws, which are also the 4 paws, which are very, very important because of the claws to hunt and bring down the prey animals. So a big male like this can, if required, eat up to 40 kilograms of meat in a single feeding bout. Supposing it had not fed for 10 or 12 days, it's extremely hungry and it's hunted successfully, that's when it'll be able to feed that quantity. So can you imagine you or me even trying to contemplate eating 40 kilograms of food? But then we will need breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and lions don't get that. So if that quantity of meat is fed, the lion largely spends the next 3, 4, 5 days drinking water, resting, and not moving very much. And it's only subsequently will he start moving and patrolling and hunting. They're extremely efficient predators as well as users of the carcass that they kill. Here you see the skull of a cheetal male. You can see the velvet antlers have been chewed down. every bit of meat, including the eyes, have been fed upon. Here is the remaining carcass. You see the rib cage there, the backbone, the forefeet, the scapula. You know, two male lions killed this cheetal something like 4:30 in the morning. Radio tracking them, so I knew when the kill had taken place. It was dark, so I was not going to go in. And it was a winter morning. From about 7:15, there was light. So at about 7:30, I went in. And in 3 hours, and they had not eaten anything for about 7, 8 days, so they were quite hungry. Between the two of them, they completely finished a big male cheetal, who should have weighed something in the region of 60, 65 kilos, of which about 40 or about 35 to 40 kilograms of meat would have been available for the two of them. The rest would have been bones and so on and so forth. A couple of pictures to show lions feeding. Here you can see this male apply his modified molar teeth, which are on the back of his jaw. These are modified into cutting teeth called carnassials, because, you know, lions don't have knife and fork. I mean, they've killed an animal. How do they feed on it? So they have to cut chunks of meat from the carcass. They don't chew their food, they just swallow it. So this is a good illustration of how they do that. And here you can get a good idea of the size of the paws. These are still retracted. When they open it out, it can go up in size by about 50% and the claws come out. Here they're using, he's using the paws to steady the meat as he continues to feed. More pictures of them feeding. Here is a group of females and they're young feeding on a cheetal. If you look carefully, you can see the cheetal skin there. And here's a lioness feeding on an nilgai. This is a radio-collared animal. If you look closely, you can see the brown collar around its neck. It had weighed her, so we know she weighed only about 110 kilograms. And this nilgai would have weighed more than twice its size. So she was able to bring this nilgai down by herself. Just one single lion was able to bring down an animal more than twice its weight. Said lions still feed on livestock. Here is a group of lions feeding on domestic buffalo. This happens both within the forest as well as outside. And I often describe the lions inside and outside as somewhat different in their behavior. And I will illustrate it towards the end of my talk in some stunning photographs. But the main take home is these lions outside tend to be very disturbed by people. Some of you might have seen some really horrible videos of people taking undue advantage of these lions, driving very close to them, disturbing them, and so on. And hence, they are very suspicious of people. They tend to be very aggressive and compared to the lions inside. And I'll show you some pictures of lions inside to give you a sense of how, within quotes, user-friendly they can be. Some data. There's a study some few years ago to show how what the lions were feeding outside is largely domestic prey. And when the first quantitative study of lions' diet was done by Dr. Paul Joslin in the late 60s, early 70s, he was able to establish from scat analysis that 75% of what the lions were feeding then was livestock. Dr. Joslin, Dr. Berwick, and a few others who did a concentrated multidisciplinary research late 60s and early 70s gave some recommendations to the Gujarat state government as well as government of India, based on which there were some important management actions that was taken. One of which was setting up the national park, which is about 250 square kilometers, and also stopping seasonal influx of livestock, both of which resulted in an enormous increase in wild prey, which is primarily cheetal, sambar, nilgai, and wild pigs. And by the time I did my studies between 85 and 90 field work, I found a complete reversal of the lion's diet, and it was primarily wild prey, with cheetal and sambar being the preferred prey species. There is a seasonal variation in the lion we find that during the summer, say from about February to June, July, there is far greater amount of wild prey killed, and during the monsoon, there's a greater number of livestock. All of this is data from within the protected area. As I said, livestock continues to be an important prey base, not just outside the protected area, and equally inside the protected area. And cows, though smaller in number, killed more often as a proportion of available prey population by the lions. Buffaloes can sometimes try and defend themselves. Cows tend to bolt on seeing lions and hence become very prone to predation. And in general, lions were killing adults, and that is understandable because lions are large animals, and if they kill an adult, they'll get more meat to eat rather than kill a young animal. Lions are social, and a group of lions are called a pride. But we often think of a pride to include a male. That's actually incorrect. The definition of a pride is a group of 2 to 15 related females and their dependent offspring. You can have males resident in a pride, but they are not permanent members of a pride. Males also live in groups, ranging in size from about 2 to 7. And this association of males is called a coalition. These males can either be related or be unrelated males. Typically, larger coalitions, say 4, 5, 6, 7, would consist primarily of related males, while in smaller coalitions of say 2, 1, 3, especially in coalitions of 2, it is very likely that the males are unrelated. And we will see why such a this relatedness and how that is related to the size of the coalition. So this is what should be the real illustration of a pride of lions. You can see females, they're young, there are probably 3 or maybe even 4 generations of lions here. And adult females will more or less spend their entire life in the same pride. And this is 2 members of a 5-male coalition that I was studying. Here, there are 3 members from the same 5-male coalition. Now, what happens is that at the age of between 2.5 to 3 years, males have to leave their natal pride, the pride in which they are born. Then they spend a year or 2, either if they split, they disperse as a single male, meet up with other male or males to form a coalition, and then learn the ways of the lion world, travel around, find out if there are weak males, which they can then try and take over, which often involves a fight, and the fight can result even in the death of the losing coalition. And if the challenging coalition has misjudged the strength of the territorial male, they could also get injured and killed, or they will lose the fight and they will have to go and look for some other territory where they can try and oust the male. Males typically have between 2 to 4 years in a pride. So from the age of 4 or 5 till about 8 or 9, they could be resident. And then the cycle continues with the next generation of males coming and challenging them. There is a phase of maybe a year or 2 or 3 after males lose their territory that they can continue to survive, but outside the structure of a pride. So, using information and data from African studies, because African lions have been studied more or less non-stop from the mid-1950s. So this is what happens to a female. She's born at the age of 3 to 4. There is one of 2 paths she will take. She will either get integrated into the pride of her birth, her natal pride, or she can disperse and try and form either integrate into a new pride or form her own pride. Gets integrated from the age of about 3. She is able to breed for about 8 or 9 years and continue to be part of the pride. Females with luck can live as long as 18 years in the wild, and males with luck can only live for about 10 or 12 years. What happens to males? I said at about 2.5, 3 years, they have to disperse, then they form a coalition, and then they have to wait to bide their time. They gain experience, they gain strength, and if they're lucky, they establish a territory. In Africa, that tenure is short, 2 or 3 years. We expect in India to be slightly longer, and then they get ousted, and then there is the post-territorial nomadic phase. So the life of the male lion, there is one nomadic phase after dispersal and prior to territory establishment. There's a second nomadic phase after they are ousted. As I said, they live much shorter lives. Typically because males get into fights all the time, other males see males as threats, and males live in smaller groups, especially once they're ousted. They might even lose their coalition males, and they might have to lead lonely lives, and hence their ability to defend when they are in a weakened state is much lesser compared to a female. Territorial pride females are always going to be part of a larger group, and hence they have strength in numbers, and they getting into fights is far less a frequency than that of males. This is again a rare picture from Gir. You see a male lion standing, and for zoology students, you should know this behavior is called Flehmen, F-L-E-H-M-E-N. He's basically testing the availability of the female. Is she cycling? Is she ready to mate with him? When you see a male and female like this, you know for sure that it's a mating. Males tend to very closely effectively guard the females they are mating with. Their mating session can last anything from 3 to 5 or 6 days. First day is kind of basically getting to know each other somewhat. There is a bit of tension. By the end of the first day, they would start their mating. In the peak of 2 or 3 days, they can mate 3 or 4 times an hour, and it's a very loud and raucous affair. It's quite aggressive. It looks as if they are fighting. Here, I mean, this is all typical for lion watchers. We know that this is a pair of mating animals. The female, the sinuous movements of the female and the male, very, very close to her. And this is the act of mating. See the size difference. And this is where the female feels insecure, because there is an opportunity for this male to actually injure the female. He's on top of her. He's so much bigger. If he wants one bite on the neck or the head of the female, can cause a grievous injury. So the actual act of mating will last a few seconds, like 20, 30 seconds. And as soon as he ejaculates, the female will turn around and kind of aggressively swipe at the male, and the male has to get out of the way quickly. Very often he does not, and she lands a blow. And so at the end of 4 or 5 days, a mating male will often have plenty of scratch marks and scars on his face and blood dripping from his face. There's another picture of them. Now, we've been talking about lions both within the forest and outside the forest. Lions also have somewhat pronounced mating periods. You can see this data given by Meena Venkatraman. Bulk of the mating takes place in winter to early summer. They do meet throughout the year. So January to May, June is when the bulk of the mating takes place. And you see the birth of cubs also tracking that. So midsummer, March, April is when the bulk of the cubs are born. And there is an ecological reasoning for this, simply because when lionesses give birth, their mobility is somewhat restricted. At least lionesses within a pride often coordinate their cycling. So cubs are born on more or less the same time. So a couple of lionesses can go out to hunt while one or two can stay back to take care of the young ones and lactate and give milk to the cubs and so on. So during summer, water becomes a restricting resource, and hence prey animals concentrate around waterholes. Often waterholes also have dense cover, and that's where lionesses also give birth. So access to prey during this period of April, May, June, before the monsoon comes in July, becomes easier around waterholes, and that is very vital to enhance the hunting success and thereby the survival chances of the lionesses as well as our young. So while they breed throughout the year, there is a pronounced mating period and a pronounced birth peak in the annual cycle of things for lions. Typically, their gestation period is about 110 days. You see data from Gear, again, Mina's data. We were able to study 10 litters. So the litter size is somewhat quite typical for lions, about 2.5 cups per liter, well within the range that we know from Africa. So it's a very productive population. But males also resort to infanticide. This typically takes place after a takeover of a pride. Supposing a group of young males come, fight, and oust resident pride territorial males, one of the first things they will do is to look for young cubs who would still be suckling and try and kill them. This is simply because their tenure in the pride is limited and they want to use that time to effectively mate and pass on their genes to the next generation. Lionesses would try to defend their cubs. Sometimes they succeed, but more often than not, given the size difference, males are able to get hold of the cubs and kill them. As I said, males are territorial, and to be able to defend their territory, they often enter into fights. Injuries like this are not uncommon, and at the same time, lions have their own ways of dealing with it. There's really no need for any human intervention. Lions spend quite a bit of their waking hours walking around and patrolling their territory. They like to use human-made paths like this because it's soft, there is no leaf litter or thorns. And what is the resource they are defending? They're basically defending the pride females and the young that they have. So they are defending their own genes. Apart from patrolling, lions have two other ways of announcing their presence. I call them visiting cards. One is roaring. Roaring is a short duration, long distance visiting card. Under the best of circumstances, supposing a lion is on top of a hill, it is a still day, the roar sound can travel 3-4 kilometers very, very easily. So when the lion roars, depending on who is listening to the roar, the signal is different. If it is to its pride, if it is to its coalition members, it is like saying good evening or good morning, hello, I am here, you don't have nothing to worry about. But if it is to other territorial males or other nomadic males, the signal is completely different. It is saying, beware, I am strong, I can roar regularly, don't mess with me. If you come any closer to me, I will challenge you, I will fight you. So obviously the roar can last only for the time that it is roaring. So a roar again lasts some 30-40 seconds, but it will roar 3-4 times every hour from about an hour before sunset to about 2 hours after sunrise. So it's a good 10-12 hours. It is roaring regularly because during the hotter periods of the day, all lions are typically resting. The other visiting card is what is called a scent mark. Here you can see a male lion scent marking, and you can actually see the squirt come out in this picture. These are small bits of urine mixed with pheromones, which are chemicals unique to each animal. So lions have an ability to come and smell and recognize which animal has sprayed there. And the scent marking is to be seen as a chemical fence, like an electric fence. This is a chemical fence. So if there are friendly lions going past, they will recognize that this is being sprayed fairly recently, and scent marking can last, given ideal weather conditions, 6, 7, even up to 8 or 10 days. If it is exposed to sun, if there is a lot of rain, obviously it will get washed away sooner. When a lion is actively spraying and scent marking, it can often do it every 50, 60 meters. And it often chooses a conveniently placed tree, which is slightly leaning to one side, or rock. So it looks for somewhat secluded sites, secluded from weather elements, not secluded from other animals, so that the scent mark can last for a slightly longer time. So lion actively patrols, roars regularly, scent marks regularly, and these are the ways by which it demarcates its territory. These are the ways by which it defends and fights for its territory. If it comes across strange animals, it would chase it away, and if it gets hold of it, and if it's stronger than that, the intruding male, it will not hesitate from fighting and even killing the animal. Person in blue, Dr. AJT Johnson, India's first wildlife biologist, trained wildlife biologist. He was my PhD guide. This is a picture going back to 1987. And believe it or not, that is me. This is a tranquilized male lion, and you can see the radio collar around its neck. Radio collaring is a research technique. It should be used only by people who are trained both in the capture and care of the animals that they want to collar, as well as those who are trained in then gathering and analyzing the data that comes from this kind of research. Amongst the things we did once we tranquilized and radio collared the animal was do a quick veterinary checkup to make sure it was doing well, weigh the animal, collect ectoparasites like ticks and mites, make measurements of its body, its teeth, and so on and so forth. Once you have collared animals in the landscape, I was kept really busy. Because Gir is an undulating habitat with lots of rolling hills, I had to climb hills regularly to get good signals of these animals. If I was lucky, I could get these signals as far away as 5 or 6 kilometers, sometimes barely a kilometer, because depending on where the animal was, the habitat in which it was, the terrain features that were there, the signal would be powerful or weak. And these signals are directional, so that's why I have a directional antenna in my hand. And from the direction from which I get the strongest signal, I would then either go closer and closer to actually see the animal, see what it's doing, with what other animals it is there, what kind of habitat, and mark on the map its location. This is Mina's data again, and now you see why this is important. It's a large area. Without radio collaring, there is no way of guaranteed sighting of the same animal on a fixed frequency, because that's the kind of research schedules we have. So now you see 2001, it was born here. Then it dispersed, it tried to set up territory here. Then it moved again, it set up territory here. And by the end of the study, it had even moved there. Without a radio collar, there's no way we could have done this kind of tracking. Here's a lot more sample size for a single animal. And then you can see the size of the habitat using home range it was using, more than 170 square kilometers based on more than 300 radio locations. Mina also finished her studies a long time ago now, and both the radio collars, the technology have all advanced so much that a lot of it is now come with GPS and its satellite tracking, and many people are doing studies primarily collecting the data based on when they are based in the lab. They are not even out in the field. They spend some time in the field, but bulk of the time is in the lab. While the data collection techniques have definitely improved, to me, there is a great element of learning and also fun in doing 100% field work, simply because living in the habitat enables you to understand the context and its interaction and its animals' behavior, as well as the human element, which is all in the Indian context very, very important to plan and implement conservation. Now, we're talking about lions inside and outside. The following maps give you a very good idea of what I've been talking about. Here you have this block of about 1,500 square kilometers, which is the protected area. As you can see, lions are found all over this place. And you can zoom in here. These are the coastal plantations and coastal forest. And this is the area in Bhavnagar district. Compared to this compact forest tract, these are fragmented and much, much smaller in size. This is data from 5 years ago, and this dark red boundary sets the distribution of the lions in Saurashtra Peninsula, and you can see that roughly 50% of the lions are found outside. Here you have a southwest coastal population of 30 odd lions, southeast of about 18 lions, about 80 lions in this patch in Savarkundla, about 300 animals inside the protected area. So the number I was tracking early on, other than just the population, the most recent estimate of their distribution is up from 22,000 square kilometers to 30,000 square kilometers. But what does it look like? We've seen pictures of the protected area, the national park, and the wildlife sanctuary. So I have a reasonable idea of what it looks like. What is happening in the 25, 20, I mean, if it's 30,000, it's then 28,500 square kilometers, which is not the protected area. What is the habitat like? It's like this. You have a lion sleeping in the foreground. It's a rural road. You have two men on motorcycles. I mean, this is real life, lion life and conservation in Saurashtra today. This is within the forest. And there are lions crossing railway tracks all the time, and it's not unusual for them to get killed on the railway track. Now is when I want to show you a couple of videos, give you a sense of what it's like. The second video, this is a street in a village. Essentially, the reason I showed these videos is for you to get an idea of what the life of lions is outside. The last section of the talk, we often talk of conservation. I don't know whether we think enough about conservation, including from specialists like the wildlife managers we have in India. What do we mean by conservation? Is it about the fate of individual animals? Or is it the fate about populations of animals? Or is it about fate of communities of species? Or is it about habitats? Or is it about all of this? When we talk of conservation, What are the time frames we are using? Is it one financial year or one calendar year? Or is it 1 decade or 2 decades or 3 decades? Do we plan with that time frame in mind? Unfortunately, in India, we've largely adopted a conservation model which excludes people. So it brings into question issues related to human rights, justice, and inclusiveness. Are there costs of conservation? And if there are costs, who bears these costs? And if there are benefits, who reaps these benefits? I don't want to spend too much time discussing this, but I definitely want all of you to pay some time to think about these things, and I'm happy to discuss it at the end of the talk in the question and answer session. Now, early on, I showed you some maps to show how the population of lions in India are today restricted to in and around Gir. They've been restricted to in and around Gir for the last 120, 140 years. So a long time. It's been a remarkable success from a close brush to extinction, with extinction of about 12 or 20 or 25 or 50 animals, to today's population of 700 or more animals. So that's something that we need to applaud, acknowledge, and take pride in. But at the same time, success also needs to be managed. What we have today is something which is completely risky and unacceptable from a conservation science perspective. It is, whether it's 15 or 700, all your lions are at one location. It's like saying all your eggs are in one basket. And if the basket drops, whether you have 10 or 50 or 500 eggs, the eggs are all likely to break. And that's the risk that this population of lions faces today. My PhD research project, which the fieldwork was done from December of 85 to March of 1990, was funded and supported by the Wildlife Institute of India. And it is primarily to get ecological information to plan and implement what is called as translocation of lions. Translocation is when you move wild animals from one location to another location for a free-ranging release, not for a captive release. So based on my research in 1993 to 94, we did field work in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh to try and locate alternate sites where lions could be translocated. And to cut a long story short, based on a variety of parameters, we chose this wildlife sanctuary, Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary, Kuno, as the most suitable site for translocating lions. This decision was taken in January 1995. Kuno gets its name from the Kuno River, which is a perennial tributary of the Chambal. Kuno is filled with diverse and very productive habitats, including grasslands, but the early 90s, when we were doing our work, it also had a large resident as well as migratory livestock. There were several villages who were resident in the sanctuary, and all of that was a potential problem if lions were going to be translocated to that site. So when 1995 the decision was made, it was also decided that Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary would see a process of voluntary relocation and resettlement of the villages. Kuno Wildlife Sanctuary would also be increased in size, about 700 to 800 square kilometers from the then 450 odd square kilometers, and it will also be given the status of a national park. Thereby, it has greater levels of protection when lions are translocated. The Madhya Pradesh Forest Department did a remarkable job over the next 5 to 10 years, and Kuno has been ready for lions to be translocated since about 2005-2006. Unfortunately, politics has dominated the discourse about lions, and it's been there even in the 80s when I was doing my fieldwork. Towards the end of the 80s, for some strange reason, the Gujarat State Assembly actually passed a resolution to oppose translocation of lions. And at that point of time, even the decision to translocate had not been taken. And what is again remarkable was this is something all political parties agreed upon. And there was a very pronounced attempt to emotionally raise issues to build this opposition, saying that if lions go, Gujarati pride would be hurt. At no point in time did the forest department or the state government either encourage or allow an open and fact-based debate or discussion on the need for translocation, on the risks related to translocation, and more importantly, the risks of not undertaking translocation. As in the introduction, they kindly introduced me as having served as an expert advisor to the forest bench of the Supreme Court. That was an opportunity that just came out of the blue in 2012 February. I got a phone call. I was asked whether I would be interested in playing that role. I was then living, as I now live in Bangalore, and the Supreme Court, of course, is in Delhi. So between February to May, June of that year, almost every week, sometimes twice a week, I was traveling between Bangalore and Delhi to be in court and to be able to help the bench, which was then hearing a public interest litigation filed to say why hadn't the lions been translocated. Both in the court arguments as well as in outside, Gujarat government, for some strange reason, has been giving extremely flawed ecological and conservation arguments. At no point in time have I seen a willingness to engage with facts or reason. And within the state, of course, there's a fairly clear atmosphere of fear, more or less a gag order, which prevents any open discussion on the merits and demerits of the translocation plan. I would pin the failure on the government of India, Ministry of Environment and Forest, as well as both the state governments, Gujarat and Madhya Pradesh, and I'll explain why in a bit. So as I said, there was this public interest litigation filed. It had been filed in 2006, so by the time I got called in, it had been in court for 5 or 6 years. And after about 4 or 5 months of hearing, the court passed its judgment on 15th of April 2013, more than 7 years ago. It ordered the translocation of lions within 6 months, which meant by about October of 2013, lions should have been translocated. What were the basis for coming to that decision? The court invoked Articles 48 and 51A of the Constitution, which talk about both our roles and responsibilities towards the environment in general and also wildlife in particular. It emphasized the fact that the National Board for Wildlife had actually recommended the translocation of lions, and the NBWA was seen as the highest policy-making body on wildlife matters in India. And the translocation of lions was mentioned in the National Wildlife Action Plan of 2016. It also meant that that was something that the government was clearly planning and thinking about. But they went beyond that. If you read the judgment, they very clearly state that no state or organization or individual can claim ownership or possession over wild animals in the forest. Animals in the wild are properties of the nation for which no state can claim ownership, and the state's duty is to protect the wildlife and conserve it, ensuring the ecological and environmental security of the country. Preservation of an endangered species, for which the only standard we have to apply is the species best interest standard. I mean, this is very, very important what the court was saying. Forget Gujarati pride, forget everything else. What is good for Asiatic lions? That should be the sole motivation for all decisions related to their management and their conservation. There was a complication with the then proposal to introduce African cheetahs in Kuno, but the April 2013 order basically squashed that proposal. They also extended themselves by saying that not just lions, but all species found in India needs far greater attention. We need to assess regularly using science, and where required, we have to put in place recovery programs. They actually ordered an exclusive parliamentary legislation, a new set of laws. But unfortunately, there has been no action even though 7 years have gone by. What is the current status? The current status is 7 years have gone by, the Supreme Court judgment is there. The Gujarat government challenged it very soon after July and August of 2013, and they had two avenues to challenge. Both those challenges were set aside by the Supreme Court. So the April 2013 order is still very much in operation. One of the orders, one of the parts of the order was to set up an expert committee. Like Dr. Jan Singh and Dr. Jala of Wildlife Institute and forest officers and Government of India officials, I'm also a member of this committee. Unfortunately, this committee has not even met after December 2016. So it's nearly 4 years since the committee has not even met. What do we know about Kuno? Kuno is more than ready. And this is being borne by several independent studies, studies by Dr. Raghu Chandawat's team, studies by Wildlife Institute of India, studies, not, I wouldn't call it a study, but a brief field visit over a couple of days by the expert committee in December of 2016. It is very well protected, it is reasonably well managed, there is prey population, there has been a tremendous recovery of prey population. As recommended in 1993, 24 villages have been moved out, more than 1,500 families have been moved out. So there's been tremendous sacrifices and investment made. And Kuno's area has been expanded, and I think it's also been declared as a national park. In 2016, another conservationist went to court and filed a contempt petition saying, how can the government of India not ensure the translocation of lions when in 2013 it was ordered to take place within 6 months? So 2016, the contempt petition was filed. It came up for hearing only in 2017. And the last hearing took place in March of 2018, when the government basically got away by saying, we will hold meetings in the next few weeks. So the logjam or the stalemate continues. There is no action in court. Supreme Court obviously is not paying attention to this. And in some sense, my worst fears are also coming true. I wish they weren't, but they are coming true. There are pronounced mortalities of lions. I'm not saying lions should not die, but it is the frequency of their death, the number of lions that are dying, but more importantly, the causes of death. In 2018, a minimum of 30 lions have died due to a combination of canine distemper virus and babesiosis. And we suspect a lot many more lions were infected and several more have also died, not just in 2018, but also subsequently. The first 5 months of this year, that is from January to May of 2020, about 100 lions have died, and most of them also died due to disease. So we are sitting on top of a ticking time bomb, and this is not some science fiction. In 1994, there was an outbreak of canine distemper virus in the world's largest contiguous lion habitat, which is the Serengeti Mara ecosystem in Tanzania and Kenya, which has a resident population of 3,000 lions, and 2/3 of that population got infected in 3 weeks, and about 1,000 lions died in that period. We've been lucky that 2 outbreaks of canine distemper virus doesn't seem to have had that kind of devastating impact, but we should not be tempting fate by not translocating lions. India is a peculiar place when it comes to its nature, to its relationship with nature. Um, Many of us individually and in our communities often have very, very pleasant, very agreeable, and often even appreciative relationships with nature. Increasingly, we're also seeing things like this. Here, this is an engineering college. A leopard came in, it was disturbed. I think it ran up the terrace and couldn't find any other way and had to jump out of it. Sometimes people do take law onto their hands. Unfortunately, here, the leopard was bludgeoned to death. But you also have situations like this where even though an animal has been killed, people still show reverence for nature. I think this is an element that is what played a very, very important role of India still holding on to some fantastic wildlife populations, both large, small, of varying sizes and varying ecologies right across. Last 4 or 5 slides. This is the first picture of a lion I took in December of 1985. I grew up in Madras, basically playing cricket. So my exposure to wildlife was somewhat limited. I was a member of the Madras Naturalist Society, the Bombay Naturalist Society, and things like that. So there were some field trips I used to take. But this is not, I mean, I was not one of those people who, like from childhood, had been exposed to wildlife, at least large and dangerous animals. And growing up in Tamil Nadu, my knowledge of Hindi was quite weak. I'd spent about 6 months in Dehradun Wildlife Institute of India, and I was then sent to do my work. I had a local boy, about 15 years, from the village, helping me navigate my way, learn about geese. 3 full days, a lot of walking, a lot of lion tracks, a lot of lion droppings, a lot of kills, plenty of roaring. But my last evening, I hadn't seen a lion. I was beginning to have second thoughts on the correctness of my decision because I was a marketing executive for 2 years. I quit a marketing career to get into wildlife. And if I had to study an animal I was not going to see, I didn't know what it meant. Suddenly out of the bush came 4 lions. And I was scared because I had only seen a leopard at about 50, 60 meters before, once on foot. No other large cats I had seen on foot before. And these animals were barely 50 meters from me and they were approaching us. So in my broken Hindi, I asked the boy, what should I do? He said, no, just keep quiet. So I held my breath, I stood still. And they kept coming and coming. They didn't attack us. 3 of them went into the bush, by which time I realized, oh, I have a camera, I have a binoculars, I should do something with it. And by the time I took this picture, not a great picture, but still I'm very proud of it. It took me about 6 months to do this. You can see 3 lions in the background and me in the foreground. Gear does not allow access everywhere you need to be on a vehicle. And if you need to identify individual animals, you often need to be 20 meters or less because of the dense vegetation in which you're working. And that's the only reason people who do field work get so close. But the other side of the story is how tolerant, how in some sense user-friendly these lions are. In no way can you call them domesticated. They're completely wild animals, but these are animals which allow you this remarkable access. Here, you see my own shadow. It's a wide-angle picture. And that male lion is sleeping. He has eye half open. Clearly knows I'm there, but not disturbed allows me that kind of access. Adult male sleeping. I took this picture. He heard the camera shutter go, and look at his reaction. Not of alarm, not of aggression, but of curiosity. As I said, India comes with its peculiar challenges. This is a road that marks the boundary between the national park and wildlife sanctuary. What do you see? A public transport bus with a couple of lions walking on it. We still are managing fine, but these are some of the challenges that we really need to be able to address if you need to make progress and really secure the wild places that are required for species like lions. I've lost count of the number of talks I've given. I just hope it's been of interest. People have learnt a bit about the remarkable lions of India and that it's not the road of extinction for this species. We talked about lions and its prey, but Gir is a remarkable place for a variety of wildlife and nature, and also for some of the most fantastic sunrises and sunsets. I'd like to end by acknowledging all of them, people who have helped me in various ways, not only to put together this presentation, but right through in my understanding of lions, their ecology. That comes. Thank you very much, and I'm open to take questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving a wonderful presentation towards us.
So I already have a question from Wild to Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that says, can you tell some major human-lion conflicts the farmer or community is facing? Yes, people have a problem of predation, but Forest Department also has a compensation system. In general, unlike other parts of India, people do not take law into their hands. They report the death to claim compensation, but it is a process that can be complicated. It requires the Maldari to go to the Forest Department, which means he cannot take the cattle out for grazing that day. The rate of compensation is somewhat lower than the market rate. So there are some complications there. But the problem is somewhat bigger outside, because there the compensation is not quite as well established as within the wildlife sanctuary. So there are some issues there. But fortunately, till now, unlike other areas, people have not taken law into their hands.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, Guru, I am
Yes.
Satyanarayana from the Department of Wildlife, ABC College, and I am also retired from the ABC College Wildlife Department. And Ravi Challa, I would like to clarify, because you have mentioned the domestic livestock is the major prey. Is it due to the non-availability of the wild species there, like your sambar and spotted deer, maybe due to the optimal foraging theory? And then again, in your studies, during 1993, you reported that with regard to diet, 70% of the wild prey. Could you clarify on these two statements, Ravi Challa?
Yeah. There are two areas you need to see. The majority of wild prey diet is within the protected area. The majority of domestic animal diet is outside the protected area. We saw how about 50% of the lion population is today not within the protected area. It is living outside the protected area. For those lions, their major prey is livestock. But for lions which are living within the protected area, their major prey is cheetal and sambar. Yes, Smita.
Ravi, I want to know, do the Asiatic lions also indulge in infanticide?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I had a slide where I showed about 55% of cub mortality in a particular year was due to infanticide. That's a particularly high proportion, but that is not normal. But Asiatic lions also most definitely indulge in infanticide. It's an evolutionarily adapted behavioral pattern.
Okay.
Hi Ravi, I'm Arun Dikshit from Ahmedabad.
Hi, Arun.
Hi. I have wanted to your observations on these two things. One is very recently there was some controversy emerged from during a discussion that this lion versus the tourism related things. Now the state policies are trying to say that lion should be used as a resource for the tourism purpose. That's one side. Not for the meat, but at least for tourism thing, they are very, very strong. It should be open. It's already open, but then it has to be very, very decentralized thing. So one thing, what is your take on the tourism as a threat or maybe the beneficial for the lion? That's one thing. Second question is, I wanted to understand about the combined effect of the lion and leopard, because leopard is also increasing in that area, the entire landscape. How they combinedly overtaking the human landscape basically and trying to increase the problem of the Maldaris and others basically. So these two things basically.
So to answer your question about tourism, I don't think we should lock up things. I think these are resources which are publicly owned and publicly available. At the same time, everything needs to be done with certain controls and a certain norm of behavior. Unfortunately, like in most walks of life, even wildlife tourism in India is influenced by influence, meaning if you know somebody higher up or whatever, you get special treatment, you get special access. So that aspect definitely needs attention, that every member of the public who has the pass, who has the right credentials to enjoy nature should get access. That access in no way should affect or diminish wildlife, especially lions. No, nothing can justify disturbing wildlife. So that those are the main things from a tourism perspective, I would say. But the problem in Giris or in around Giris, you have now 300 or more lions not within the protected area. They are in human dominated habitats. You can't now tell a farmer, don't go to your farm because there is a lion. Or you know, that those are the kind of things that are happening. I mean, I've seen pictures of somebody opening a peanut go down and seeing lions inside there. I've also seen some very horrible videos of people teasing lions, either with a piece of meat or a chicken, or more recently, a group of lions is feeding on a cattle, either baited or otherwise by a road. Then a group of 4 or 5 people are either using a vehicle or shouting and disturbing those lions. Now, these are all again accidents waiting to happen. Twice, thrice, 4 times, people can get away. But these are large and dangerous animals, and one bite, one swipe by the lion will definitely result in fairly bad consequences for those individuals. So I am all for systematically managed and fair tourism. I think it's a revenue generator. I think it's a way of allowing citizens of this country or citizens of the world to develop appreciation and connection with Gir, with the lions and nature in general. But anything that goes beyond a limit, anything that affects lions or its environment, definitely is not acceptable. Arun, I'm not so sure I have the data or understanding in terms of lion and leopard populations to give you a very nuanced answer. But what I can definitely tell you, lions in people's backyard or leopards in people's backyard is all fantastic for us to sit in our secure houses, with concrete walls and proper doors to say, people will have to learn to coexist. Put yourself or myself in those kind of positions, put our children in those kind of positions, we will then answer it in a very different way. And for the lions and leopards themselves, imagine their lives having to deal with highways and at night with vehicles and their headlights. They're not adapted for that kind of life. Which lion or leopard knows how to cross a road or recognize green or red signal or climb fences or electricity or garbage or disease? So this is not at all an ideal situation. Densely populated human settlements is not an ideal habitat for large cats. Yes, for some smaller species of insects, invertebrates, even mammals and birds, maybe. But definitely large mammals and densely populated human settlements is not a recommended way for us to plan our future for conservation. Now, I see a question from Vyas.
Thanks a lot.
Question from Vyas Vikrant. Sir, can you please repeat about the subspecies of lions? Okay. Recent genetic studies basically have shown there are only 2 subspecies of lions. These lions found in West and Central Africa and the lions found in Gir are now called Panthera leo, and the lions found in East and Southern Africa are called Panthera leo melanochaeta.
I have a question. My name is Sharad, and I've been following you and been to Luno also and here also. and believe me, there's the habitat is very interesting in Kuno. My question is that there were a lot of debate whether in Kuno a lot of migratory tiger population from Ranthambore comes into when the rivers levels are less. So is there any possibility of tiger lion conflict happening in Kuno? If yes, because it's never happened earlier. The tigers and lions coexisting at least in last 100 years. So,
Sharad, at least in last 100 years is the right operative word, because I showed you the past distribution of lions, and they cover large parts of present day states of Gujarat, Rajasthan, even Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and parts of Bihar. So they did overlap with tigers. We have to make ecologically informed guesses of how they would have coexisted. The denser, wetter, and probably more undulating habitats would have been the strongholds of tigers. The flatter, drier, and probably more open habitats would have been the stronghold of lions. And we all know, when you look at a landscape of several hundred square kilometers, you will have patches which are more undulating, you will have patches which are less undulating. You'll have patches with dense vegetation, you'll have patches with less dense vegetation. So that's the way they seem to have divided up habitat. This whole thing about Ranthambore and tigers, they will sort it out. I think an occasional tiger passing through Kuno with a resident lion population is not something that we should worry about. And if there is a resident lion population, even a tiger might not even venture, simply because there is enough evidence in terms of roaring and scent marking of the presence of a large cat.
thank you very much.
So, good evening, sir.
Good evening,
This
sir.
is
This is Arun Kumar from Tamil Nadu. My question also related to the same which you answered earlier. Actually, my question is, have you ever witnessed any territorial conflicts between tiger and lion, sir?
It cannot be called, first of all, a territorial conflict, because territory is a concept within a species. Lions will fight other lions for territory. Okay. Number two,
so they never, sorry to interrupt, they never ever, going to fight for territory with other species, sir?
They will not fight for territory. They will just fight each other simply because they don't like each other. A lion, if it sees a leopard, will try and catch it and kill it. If a leopard sees lion cubs, it will catch it and kill it. Okay. But they are not fighting for territory. These species just don't get along well. A leopard obviously has overlapping distribution through bulk of the range of the lion, and what enables it is its ability to be arboreal. Okay, it can climb a tree and so on and so forth. But tigers and lions are more or less the same body size. Their prey choice is more or less the same. Hence, their ability to coexist in the same territory is not there. They will have to keep some distance between each other. An occasional meeting, once every few days or something, meeting in the sense passing through might happen, but you can't expect them to live in exactly the same location.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
So, good evening, sir. This is Kotishwaran from Chennai. Thanks for that wonderful presentation, sir. So, my question is that what about the scenario with lions? Is there any documentations or any records earlier about their presence along the Western Ghats? Because most of the time I've heard about you speaking about the distribution over central region. Is there any documentation on along the Western Ghats? The second question is about often we speak about this inbreeding and genetic disasters and things like that. Are there any signs of albinos or anything being reported in Gir, sir?
Two questions. In terms of geographical distribution, there is no evidence of the lions having lived south of the Narmada River. So there's no question of the Western Ghats. In terms of inbreeding, some genetic studies have been done. They very clearly established that the Asiatic lion population went through a genetic bottleneck, and that their genetic diversity is much less compared to populations of African lions. So that is established. But there is no evidence, either in terms of their reproduction or in terms of their morphology and behavior, of any impact of this reduced genetic diversity. You've seen pictures of lions, they all have 4 legs, 1 tail, and you can see how efficient they are in hunting. You've seen the data on cubs and litter size and survival. So there's absolutely nothing to suggest, even though there is a reduction in their genetic diversity, that doesn't seem to have impacted their behavior, their survival, or their ecology.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Too Little, 2 questions. Why lions not honored as national animal? In fact, the lion was India's first national animal. For about 20 years, from 1952 to 1971, if I remember correctly, lions were India's national animal. In fact, the Ashoka pillar, which is our national symbol, has 4 lions. But around that time, there was a move to set up Project Tiger. And then it was argued, unfortunately at that point of time, lions also had very poor public relations, because there was something called the lion show that was being conducted, which allowed people to go fairly close to lions. These lions were baited by a road. People will go and see them. So everybody thought these lions were lazy, they are not wild, and so on and so forth. So these 2 factors, the imminent launch of Project Tiger, there was a recommendation to change from lions to tiger. So just before Project Tiger was launched in 1972, the lion was replaced by the tiger as the national animal. About 5 years ago, a member of parliament from Gujarat moved a kind of a resolution saying we should reinstate the lion as the national animal. But the Ministry of Environment and Government of India did not take action on that. Now, the second question of Dr. Too Little is, will reintroduction of vermin like nilgai or wild boar into lion habitat help in conservation? Now, first of all, I don't think you should call nilgai and wild pigs as vermin. The biggest vermin going around in the world is, you all know who, it's you and me. So there might be cases of local populations and conflict, I mean excess population or high density population and conflict with agriculturalists. One way that the government of India has allowed is controlled hunting, which is called culling. Capture and movement of prey animals definitely into gear makes no sense, because you already have a diverse and dense resident prey population. We can only move these prey animals into habitats where the population density is low. There are several such populations, habitats, but those habitats first need protection. There's no point in putting all the effort of capturing these wild animals, moving them there and finding them poached or otherwise. So there are several things that need to happen. It's a very resource intensive management technique. That's not something that I would recommend as a priority at this point in time. And not definitely from a lion conservation.
Hi, sir. I wanted to take up a question. Am I audible?
Yes, may I know your name, please?
Yeah, I'm Shaz. I'm a filmmaker. I wanted to ask you 2 things. First, I'm interested in the evolutionary history and ecology of the lion. Is the Gir lion the same subspecies that once ranged all across the Middle East and parts of the Arabian subcontinent and Iran, right down to India? And is it the same subspecies that once the Romans used to fight in their arenas? And second, with regards to the 2013 order of the Supreme Court, are we moving any forward with the relocation of lions outside Gir into Kuno or other habitats that have been identified? With regards to evolutionary history, I wanted to know whether there's been evidence that lions existed along these, all across these places.
Okay, Shas, I don't know when you joined, because early on in my talk, I showed a black and white map showing the distribution of lions reconstructed using natural history notes and Shikar, which clearly shows Iran, Iraq, parts of Syria, what is present-day Pakistan and much of north and central India having lions. Lions obviously evolved in Africa, and through a process of natural dispersal over many centuries, I would say, they moved into Asia. So there is enough and more evidence that lions have existed in all these countries. Now, as far as translocation is concerned, again, I made it very clear that it is in stalemate. And the Supreme Court has very clearly ordered translocate lions to Kuno, which means if translocation has to be undertaken, it first has to be undertaken in Kuno, because Kuno has been chosen using very objective and scientific criteria. And starting 1995, which is what, 5 plus 20, 25 years, there has been investment, financial and otherwise, and management for preparing the site for receiving lions. Unfortunately, this has become a political football, and the court is also not quite followed up on what it needs to do in ensuring that it's. One more question I see from Mr. Rajkumar Naidu. Can you comment on how individuals can contribute to the efforts to get translocation to come in? This is active citizenship. All of us are citizens of India. The Supreme Court is Supreme Court of India. It is in our own benefit to first learn about the judgment, read about the judgment, and then petition the concerned authorities, be it the Prime Minister, be it the Minister of Environment, be it the court, and ask why a standing order of the Supreme Court remains unfulfilled.
Yes.
The other thing is to make it part of regular conversation. We often spend enormous amount of time. I mean, I enjoy cricket, don't get me wrong. About IPL, about Virat Kohli, about MS Dhoni. Look at the amount of time we spend talking about them. How much time do we, I mean, not just among wildlife conservation. I'm saying you go out for dinner, you meet your family. How often does wildlife and environmental issues actually come into the conversation? Why is it? I mean, all of us like nature, and unless we learn about it, unless we make it part of our daily discourse and our process of constant discovery, we also need to be updating ourselves by reading, by interacting. And I think that is the only way this is going to happen, because it's got into a political logjam. The powers to be have to hear that the citizens of India are very keen that this should happen, and they do not want to continue to take the risk of exposing the current population to extinction threats.
One person they asked, what is the current census population number? Sunika?
674. I'm always very worried when such exact numbers are given. It is almost guaranteed to be inaccurate, but there are lots of lines. Let us say that there are lots and lots of lines, both within the protected area as well as outside the protected area.
Thank you.
Ravi, can I take another question with you? This is Naidu.
Yes, please.
That was an excellent example. I don't live in India, but is there an organization through which numbers of people can put their opinion and commence the retranslocation? Because that is how Project Tiger became famous throughout the world. And this translocation, this is the first time I have heard of it. And I have traveled quite extensively in Tanzania and parts of India as well. My interest is mainly wildlife. I am professionally not in the wildlife. But I know of you from the days when you were with the Wildlife Institute and a young man researching in the field. I've been introduced to this seminar through someone who you met 25, 30 years ago, Anjana Bhatt.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Now you know the connection. And this, my question you've just answered. So we as individuals have to go through a different organization and want to put the lions on the same pedestal as Project Tiger.
I hear you. There is also a risk of trying to aggregate responses, because then the individual flavor and element and speciality of individual action can get diluted and even lost. I mean, I'm saying there are costs and benefits to coming under the umbrella of an organization, because your values, your motivation will always be unique to yourself. Today, I'm running an institution. Tomorrow, somebody else might run that institution. Priorities might change. So it is not an either-or situation. I think as long as individuals are keen on taking action, I think still a regular, in your case, an airmail letter. It doesn't have to be email. An airmail letter, and I don't think, independent of your citizenship, there is any diminishing of value, because the Lions of Gir are an international heritage. It is not restricted just to the boundaries of India. Like all of us like to travel and see the wonders of the world, I'm sure the rest of the citizens of the world also want to travel and see wonders of India, including the lions. And in some sense, I get a sense that if there were foreigners writing, they might actually get more traction and even a response compared to Indians writing. I work for the government and I have a sense of how the government views such communications. But one earnest request, all communications have to be polite, have to be to the point, have to have facts right. It cannot be a raving, ranting, pointing fingers kind of communication, because that will not serve anybody any purpose.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Ravi Chellam, how many lines you have planned for translocation in your proposals? That we can be convinced or not?
We have said to begin with 6 to 10 lions, 3 or 4 females, 2 or 3 males, and whatever dependent young. The idea is to go choose a resident pride, a well-settled pride, watch it for a few months, learn about pride composition, learn about its behavior. Ideally, it should be a pride which is largely hunting wild prey. You do not want animals largely hunting domestic livestock. Then you tranquilize them, have helicopters ready, move them literally after a few hours of capture, so that the move from Gir to Kuno does not lose time. In Kuno, you have to have a large enough fenced area into which these lions have to be released. And either there is resident prey, or we will have to, for a few weeks, kill wild prey and provide it to these animals from outside. You should have a shoot system. They should not see people giving them animal. It should be as if automatically the prey is made available. Why? Large cats have a homing sense, in the sense that if you move them from one place to the other, they can return to the place of origin. Leopards in India have known to travel 300, 400, 500 kilometers after having been moved. From Bombay several times, leopards, because they say they are problem causing, they take it and move it to the rural districts of Maharashtra. And after radio collaring, Vidya Atreya has established that these leopards in 3 weeks, 4 weeks time are back where they were captured. Similarly, in Africa, cheetahs, leopards, and lions, they translocate lots of them every year. They have found that they have a homing instinct. So if you keep them for 3 to 6 weeks within this fenced area, that's the time when they lose their homing instinct. They develop a fresh mental geography of their habitat, and then the chance of them settling down in the area where they are translocated is very high. But to go back to your original question, how many lions? We all understand what is called as founding effect or founder effect. If you only have one male and one female, obviously the next generation and subsequent generation will have a very narrow genetic base from which they will grow. So while you start with say 6 to 8 or 10 animals, every 3 to 5 years, it is advisable to move 2 or 3 adult males from around Gir. Now, these lions need not come from within the national park. They can come from in the human-dominated habitats, and you capture the resident male and replace them with these fresh genes. And males will be the best way of bringing in fresh genetic material into the population rather than trying to move females. So if this is done 5 or 6 times over 15, 20, 25 years, to a large extent, the genetic diversity in Gir can become inculcated into the translocated population. There's one more question from Jayashree. I heard about government, okay, to Barda Wildlife Sanctuary. If you have noticed carefully in some of my maps, I had Barda Wildlife Sanctuary, which is about 150, 180 square kilometers. It's a small sanctuary near Porbandar, west of Gir. Now, this is barely 150 kilometers as a crow flies from Gir. The idea in translocation is to isolate, to put geographical distance between the two populations, so that if a disease outbreak happens, if there is an extensive forest fire or any catastrophe, the distance provides the buffer, provides the insurance. So the idea is not just you should have it in 2, 3, 4 wildlife sanctuaries or national parks. The idea is you have them in geographically distinct locations. By translocating to Barda, that very essence of translocation is lost. It is not achieved. But what has prevented government of Gujarat from translocating to Barda? It is within Gujarat state. It could have translocated in 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020 also. By translocating to Barda, it doesn't mean they should not translocate to Kuno. And as I keep saying, all arguments have now been laid to rest by the order of the Supreme Court. I think as a law-abiding society, as a law-abiding country, we really have to reflect on what are the norms by which we want to live in this country. If an order, a standing order of the Supreme Court gets neglected and ignored like this, I mean, what future does this country have? We can't get
one more question, like actually one person is asking, any behavioral changes is there in Gir line as well as in coastal area line?
Gir line, coastal area line. I haven't studied, but I would expect obviously a coastal area line to be a little more skittish when it comes to people, because people would be disturbing them quite a bit, or maybe even more aggressive towards people. And it would be largely preying on domestic livestock. There are some nilgai and wild pig population, but its predation would be largely on domestic livestock based on availability. When was the last census of lions? The last census of lions was in June or July this year. June, I think. So it's only a couple of months ago. And the actual population, according to the official report, is 674. And their lines are not declining. The decline was all 100, 120, 140 years ago. The lion population has been constantly increasing, at least from about 1920. So which is at least in the last 100 years, the population has been constantly increasing.
Ravi, one more thing I want to have is what is the carrying capacity of that grid? When you have 700, is it all right for the carrying capacity of these lions?
No, clearly the lions have told you carrying capacity is not there. No, but there are 300 lions outside the forest. So the 300 lions are not being carried by the forest.
The population outside the forest only.
Yes, only outside the forest. So Nikita asked, are there changes in behavior of lions or other wildlife with respect to captivity and wild? Absolutely. Because once you bring animals into captivity, very often, if long-term captivity, they will be interacting with people a lot. So they will get used to people. And their food is provided by people, they will get veterinary attention and so on and so forth. Plus their movement would get restricted. So definitely the behavior of wild lions and captive lions would change significantly.
So one more person, Mr. Dr. Jai Prakash. How many lions are radio collared? I heard majority of them are collared.
Well, there is, unfortunately, these are information that is not, what shall I say, publicly available. but I was told something between 70 to 100 lions were radio collared. Unfortunately, radio collaring, which is actually a research tool, a research technique, has been used more because we have money, we'll buy collars, we'll put collars kind of thing. Nobody has quite used the tracking and the data. There are no ecological questions, there are no research questions asked to undertake this whole exercise. Recently, in the last week, 10 days, I also read that 25% of the radio collared animals had died. Now, it should not be understood that radio collars have caused the death, but the way to see it is that because of the radio collar, you could find that the animals were dead. Otherwise, no lion is going to come knock your door and say, my bridemate has died or I'm going to die. So it's not easy to find dead animals, including large animals in the wild. So it is the radio collaring that enabled people to track down dead animals. Lakshmi Prasad asks, what is the ecological importance of lions? Interesting question. Now, one way of looking at it, Lakshmi, is that lions are part of nature. As much as we have the right to exist, lions and every other species, big and small, also have the right to exist. So that, let's not get into whether it is of use and so on and so forth. From an ecological perspective, lions are apex predators. They are top of the food chain. So they also are what is called as a keystone species because they drive many ecological processes. Yes. Imagine a prey population without lions, without the top predator. Then there's nothing to control the prey population. And typically predators will kill in an easier manner older, injured, diseased animals, which means they are removing the unfit animals from the population. And that can only be of benefit to the ungulate population. Supposing the predation pressure is not operating, it has been studied that that kind of release of predation can result in overgrazing and then the habitat degradation, and after some time even a collapse in the ungulate population. Then in terms of recycling of nutrients, there is hundreds of understood and ununderstood impacts which can take place through the complex ecological and ecosystem that in which these species form. We know so little about all these complex interactions. The more we study them, the more we understand them. So I can't give you, oh, lion actually does this or does that, but a top predator is integral to the ecological functioning of any ecosystem. It need not be a lion. There could be ecosystems in which a lizard is a top predator. Yeah. There could be ecosystems in which a fish is a top predator. So whatever the top predator is an important player there. Jyoti asks how we can count lion. Very good question. There are scientific methods and there are not so scientific methods. The scientific method often uses sampling techniques and estimates lion population. The not so scientific techniques come up with numbers like 674. As I told you, we should not call these as census. These are population estimates. Now, you might have heard about camera trapping for estimating populations of tigers and leopards. Now, with tigers and leopards, they have distinct markings, stripes, and rosette patterns, which are like our fingerprints. Each tiger has a unique stripe pattern. Each leopard has a unique rosette pattern. In the case of lion, the body does not have markings, so you cannot use camera trapping. Yes. But fortunately, lions have whisker spot patterns. If you look carefully at the face of a lion, there are black dots, often in 3-4 rows. And these whisker spot patterns, technically called vibrissae spot patterns, also have unique patterns in the sense, if there are 12 spots in row 2, there might be 8 spots in row 1, there might be 9 spots in row 3 and so on. Not only the number of spots, but the relative positions of each of these spots provides a unique identifying signature. Now, this can be done either by...
Sir, sorry to
careful-
interrupt you. Can you show us a picture to explain that? Because it's very interesting what you're saying, sir.
Okay. Now, can you see where the mouse is? Do you see those spot patterns?
Yeah.
Do you see the row?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, very
So
interesting. This fact we didn't know, sir. Then thank you for telling us.
This is a technique going back to the 1970s. This is not new. Okay. This was found, this was established based on work, if I remember the scientist named Pennequick and Rudnai, done in East Africa. And it has now been used quite effectively by scientists from Wildlife Institute of India in India also. But unfortunately, the Forest Department of Gujarat does not want an objective way of counting lions or monitoring their population, and also populations of endangered species should be more or less constantly monitored. We cannot monitor it once in 5 years and say that we are doing a good job. So, there are several, and in this case, they said about 1,500 people went out for 24 hours and they came up with a number. Now, you can well imagine 1,500 people with varying observation abilities, with varying levels of training, how the data would have been collected. And 3 days later, they even came up with a number. If they collected so much data, how can they even potentially organize it, analyze it, and come up with a result in 3 days' time? And they are not transparent. This data is not shared. So even though it's public money that goes into doing all of this, everything else is subject to audit. Even public, whenever public money is used, things like lion population counts should become available to us. I think...
Two more questions is Harris Patel. Can we consider that Maldari community plays an important role in conservation of lion?
They play a role in the sense that they are very tolerant. They are in some sense independent observers of what is happening there. Otherwise, we only have the official version to go by. But obviously, Maldaris also are subject to control by the Forest Department. So it's not easy, but I'm not so sure that to conserve lions, you need Maldaris. I'm not saying the Maldaris should be thrown out. Don't get me wrong. I think Maldaris are very nice people. They live with the lions. They know how to live with the lions. But I will not extend that argument by saying if you have to conserve lions, Maldaris are required. That's where I draw the thing. Veda, Sharada, Venkata Subran, lions that stay in the same place have high risk of contracting disease, unnatural. How can you tackle issues? Yes. I don't know, maybe.
Actually, the first question we have to, is infanticide common in Asiatic lion?
Yes.
The
yes.
first question,
the answer is yes.
Yeah.
It is not. It is not uncommon. The Vedas asked another question: if lions transferring, is it possible to lead to evolution of new species? Well, there will be some genetic drift. I don't know whether it will result in new species. If it has to result in new species, we're probably talking several centuries of time. I don't think it will happen in any short period of time. It's very unlikely to happen. Thank you.
Actually, on behalf of BCF India, I take this opportunity to thank our speaker, Dr. Ravi Chellam, Carnivore Biologist and CEO Mastering Foundation, since spending his valuable time during his lockdown period. Thanks for sharing his views on roar of lions and its conservations. So thank you, sir. Thank you for giving me.
I second that. Really very informative session. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.